Hello everyone and welcome to Tyro Chess. In this video, we will be going through the Smith-Morra Gambit. So the Smith-Morra Gambit is very tricky openings for those of us who play the Sicilian. So that's why I'll be going through it, and I'll be using some of my most recent games from Lee Chess. And the idea behind this is to just familiarize myself and the audience with some of the main lines, especially my main recommendation or the line that I play against the Smith-Morra. So this opening is one of those that's very easy to deal with at the lower levels. I remember when I was 1400, 1300, I didn't really have any problems with it because white gives up a pawn. But then once you get to like 1700, 1800, it can be tricky at times because now people know how to play those openings. And I'm talking about Lee Chess ratings, which are very different from chess.com or FIDE ratings. So as you can see, another useful thing that I'm going to bring up is table base on Lee Chess. I never knew that this is how most people look at opening variations. So you can see here we have the masters database, and then here we have the database of the games played on Lee Chess. And here you can click on this, you have the player database. So here you can look at your game. So for example, according to table base, the move that I played the most here is C takes, and then you can look at some of the games that you've played. Anyways, this is something that I never knew when I first started playing here, so I just wanted to share that with you guys. So, as you can see, the Smith-Morra Gambit happens after e4, c5, and d4, and when black accepts the pawn. So here, white has two options. They can either take, but this is something else, or play c3, which starts the Smith-Morra Gambit. So in this case, c3 takes and knight takes. Of course, there's another variation where white can choose to ignore the pawn and sacrifice another pawn. So here, the main move is b takes, c takes, and then like this. And as you can see, Stockfish doesn't really like this for white. But you should also note that as of right now, we are sticking to this line right here. If white goes and plays bishop c4, I'll just go ahead with the main recommendation, and we won't be taking the second pawn here. If white chooses, they'll take the pawn, and we're back to the main lines. Okay. So here there are a few options. The main move is knight c6. So knight c6, as you can see from table base, if you just click on the first move, it's going to show you all the options that can be played, right? Right. So there are different moves and different move orders. So, oh, this is actually from my game, sorry. So if we go to the masters database, I was wondering because that's not the main line that I recognize. This is the main line, and it gets complicated. White can sometimes put the knight here, and it becomes tricky. So here I'll be going through my line, which is we'll play d6, we'll play e6, and then we'll play knight c6, knight f3, bishop e7. And the idea here is this is easier for us to develop because this is the setup that we'll be using at all times, right? And it's also easy to get used to this because white always puts the bishop here. They're always going to castle. And in this situation, the typical plan is queen e2 and rook c1. And we'll go through why in a moment. So as you can see, this game we're still following the main line. Here you can also play bishop e7 first. But I like to play knight f6 first because it transposes. So knight f6, queen e2, and then bishop e7. And this is the tricky part when white plays rook d1, right? And here it's tricky because if we do nothing, let's say we play h6, all of a sudden white has this move e5. And as you can see, the Stockfish evaluation already, white is better because we can take because of this pin right here, right? So we have to move our knight back, and if they take, our position is just cramped. We can't even take this because of the rook. So that's the main trick in the Smith-Morra. If you don't know that, you're basically in trouble. So the moment they play this, we do something very strange, which is we play e5. And this is basically the setup that we're going for in all the games. We play e5, and now we're stopping the move. We're stopping the move e5 from white. Now, as you can see from the engine says this is equal. And the reason it says that is because even though white is down a pawn, they have a very strong initiative. They've already castled. This is the only piece, the bishop, that hasn't developed. And black is yet to castle, and then we're yet to develop our bishop, and then we also want to put the queen away from this file because of the threats from the rook. So that's why. And another thing is, typically in the Sicilian, for those of you who play the Sicilian, for example, I'm a knight of player myself. In the Sicilian, when we play the move e5, we want to put the bishop on e6 because now the bishop controls this weakness, right? So the d5 square is a weakness. So here we basically have more weaknesses, but we're up a pawn. So that's the game. White is down a pawn, they're attacking. We're trying to consolidate, we want to castle, get rid of the threats, and then basically in the end game we're going to say, okay, we're up a pawn, we're going to win this because we're up a pawn. So that's the basic idea. But sometimes if you can't do that, you may have to give back the pawn. All right, so I'm just gonna describe the Sicilian that I was talking about, the knight off. So the knight off is the top move here. So I'm just gonna click the first line in table base. As you can see, in these kind of lines, we have this same setup with d6, which is a backwards pawn. It's a backwards pawn because it's behind the other pawns, but then we get to play bishop e6. So basically, even though we have a weakness here, right? There's a weakness. We are controlling this weakness with some of our pieces. And white doesn't have the same threats with the rooks on the diagonal, at least not at the moment. We'll be able to play queen c7 and maybe put our knight here, put the bishop here, and castle soon enough. But then in the Smith-Morra, we're not able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go through the games. So now we're in this position. This is the typical position. I play bishop e7. Now here my opponent plays rook e1. I play e5, which is the main move according to the master's database on Lichess. There may be other databases which are different, but the Lichess database, in terms of the openings, it seems to be good enough. All right, so we push. And here white goes for this move, bishop b5. So now we've prevented the threat on this diagonal. And here what white is trying to do is, or you see what white is trying to do. Here I made the mistake of castling. And now white gets the pawn back. Because after takes, and knight takes, we can't take the knight because of the x-ray. So now we basically lose the pawn back. So in this game I decided to put my queen here on c7. So basically I played the opening incorrectly because I did not recognize this move. I didn't recognize that they would take. So the computer wants me to play bishop d7 right here instead of castling. But it should be said that in these variations where like the Smith-Morra, where there are sacrifices, sometimes stockfish at a low depth, it's kind of tricky to note if the moves are the most accurate. So anyways, this game, we're just going to go through it quickly. I gave the pawn back. So the disadvantage of giving the pawn back is now we're no longer up a pawn. But then the upside of this is now we've gotten rid of all the threats, right? So this is one of the tactics that you can use against gambits. You can just give the pawn back and say, you know what, I no longer have problems in my position. I've developed all my pieces. Sure, white has this central pawn, but we might be able to exchange and yeah, we'll just play a normal game of chess. Even though it was intentional, this position is still okay for black. White has a slight advantage. So my opponent continues developing, and here I put my queen away because I didn't want to deal with any of the threats. But then at some point this pawn might become weak, so I might put my rook here. It should be noted that I'm lower 1900 at the moment, so higher rated players may see some inaccuracies, let's say. But if you're lower rated or we're at the same level, this video should surely be helpful. Okay, now here my opponent blundered because I was actually preparing this move the whole time. I noticed that at some point I may have to, since the knights are away from the square, I may have to play this and then white is forced to play f3. But then here this was easy because my opponent basically lost the pawn. I tried to consolidate because d5 is a move that you typically want to play in the Sicilian. According to Stockfish, I could have played knight g5, but then knight g4 rather. But then, yeah, I decided to just, you know what? Let's just fix all my problems. I'm up a pawn in this position. Up the exchange, right? So here, the rest of the game is pretty straightforward. We give the pawn back and some tricks, but at the end of all these tactics, I was just better because of this fork and I'm up a piece. So that was the first game of the Smith-Morra. Hopefully this was instructive and the key points were noted. Right, so that's the setup that we're going for. That was the first game that I played. Second game. And this is what you're most likely to face at this levels, below 2000 and below on chess. So same setup, d6, e6, knight c6, knight f3, bishop e7. Okay, now in this position, my opponent decided to push. It was the same person, basically. Offered me a rematch. And they decided to push because they realized that if they went for their line with queen c7, I was just going to play bishop e7, and after rook e1, I was just going to play e5, and no more threats for you, right? So basically, they decided to push. And here, of course, as black, we have nothing better to do than to take. So as you can see with the Smith-Morra, White's strategy is very combative, right? They're giving up more and more pawns, but then they're basically trying to cause problems. They don't want us to have a peaceful position. We'll be up in material, but White has the initiative. Okay. So here my opponent takes, and from experience, I learned that you're supposed to take with the queen, king. Most of us don't want to put our king in the center, but if this happens, just take with the king, because if you take with the knight, you have all sorts of problems. This move is coming, knight b4, or knight b5 rather, trying to fork the king and the rook. Also here, White can also just take back the pawn. Now here the advantage goes down a bit, but you can see that White is able to consolidate much quicker, right? So that's why if this happens, take with the king. Don't be afraid of this. Okay, so here I'm just up 2 pawns. I'm gonna give this pawn back if I have to, so that I can fix my position. And here the plan is simple: develop the bishop, get my king to safety, whatever way I can. And here, since the queens have been traded off, I'm worrying less about the attack. All right, so here I went for this because I didn't want any tricks with knight b5. I'm just trying to be solid. The main move just following my bishop, and here the computer wants me to go this way, right? Notice that this isn't a threat because the knight is defending. But then I went this other way. I was like, you know what? I just want my king safe. I'm gonna bring my rooks in, play b5 or something, chase the bishop, right? So bring my queen there, and as you can see, my opponent keeps trying to follow my king. They're not accepting that they're just down 2 pawns, keep trying to attack in the nature of the Smith-Morra. So here I played b5, which apparently was a mistake because of this tactic, which both of us missed. But at the very worst case scenario, the position is now just equal, but I've given up 2 pawns basically, and I'm about to lose a piece. But my opponent didn't see that, and neither did I. Note that this was a 3+2 blitz game. And now I'm trying to keep my king safe. So maybe I shouldn't have done that. I should have tried to just win basically, but I was playing for safety, and here chase away the pieces. And now at this point, it's becoming clear that I'm just up a bunch of pawns for nothing, right? So takes, and make a bunch of trades. This is a same colored bishop endgame, which I almost let slip actually, because in this position. So maybe that's another thing that I might do, study same colored bishop endgames. But I'm up 2 pawns here. I can give 1 pawn up, and here I have an outside pass pawn. So that was my strategy. I'm just going to push this pawn. And as you can see, for a moment here, I think the computer gave away my advantage. At some point, I think I lost my advantage. No? Okay, I think it's because of the depth. At the lower depth at some point it was telling me that I gave away my advantage, but apparently I didn't. Okay, so here I don't want to take this obviously because the bishop is hanging, but maybe can I do this? Can I get away with this? No, because this pawn isn't in time, it's going to be stopped. So I'd rather just give up the pawn. These are double pawns, they're not scaring anyone, and at this point protect this pawn. So now after all these trades, I'm gonna stop these pawns and I'm gonna promote. So this is how the game ended. Right, so that was the second game, the Smith-Morra. I won that game, but note that I didn't win all the games. There's some losses as well, which is why I wanted to analyze this. And these were all played on the same day, actually. It was just one of those days where I also played against some other people who ended up playing the Smith-Morra against me. So I've noticed that Lichess has does that. Like if you're facing the same opening, especially if you're having bad results, it'll pair you against people who are playing the same openings sometimes. I don't know how complicated the algorithms are, but anyways, this is another game, same setup. We're gonna play d6, e6, and knight c6. And here my opponent, the same person, went for the same setup. And here, same thing, e5. No e5 for you, right? Remember, if we just do nothing like castle, there's this, and all of a sudden we can't take because of the x-ray. Okay, so this is actually a very useful setup. You solve a lot of the complications in the Smith-Morra, and you basically just get a comfortable game. Okay, so here e5, my opponent went for knight g5, but here this doesn't do anything, right? These moves typically don't do anything because we're going to chase the knight, and h6 is a useful move in the Sicilian anyways, right? Of course here he's attacking the pawn, but we castle. If they take, they're giving up two pieces and for a rook and a pawn, which is just better for us. And they don't want to trade since they're down a pawn, right? White wants to keep the pieces. So here I just castle. And here basically chase away the piece. The reason why I have Stockfish on is because at my level and at the speed with which we're going, it might be hard to like trying to go through the moves without the use of the engine. So the engine just helps a bit. Also, bishop e6 is a useful move in these setups. Sometimes you could also go for bishop g5 if you can, but I've learned from losing some games that this move is just fine because if white trades, right? Remember we're up a pawn, so even though this pawn structure is kind of ugly, we can easily maintain everything. We'll play queen c1, and also in the Sicilian, sometimes this just helps us get in d5, and once everything clears up, we'll get d5, we'll take in some points, maybe after playing rook d1 or rook e1 prior. And also here there are threats of just moving my knight and threatening a queen trade. Right. So in this position, my opponent actually didn't take. And like in the previous game, so this was kind of funny because I already faced this, but then I forgot that here our opponent could just take. So face the same thing twice. But here I think it's different because there's a few differences in this position and the previous one. Okay, here my bishop is already developed, I think that's the main reason. Let's go to the first game. I want to differentiate. Yeah, the difference is the development of the bishop, and I didn't waste a move. I didn't waste a move with a6 as well. Sorry, the bishop, in the second game the bishop is already developed and I have a move like a6 already played rather. Right, so here I get an early d5. I lose the pawn, but here I'm just better because my pieces are active. The computer wants me to take with the pawn, but it's a blitz game and I'm usually afraid of this isolated queen's pawn because this pawn doesn't have any neighbors. Sure, it's fine in this position, but if you can't figure everything out, you might lose the pawn. So I just go for something solid. And here takes. And as you can see, I have 2 minutes. I was playing relatively quickly. My opponent was a bit slower. They had 1 minute and 20 seconds. I had 2 minutes and 49 seconds. Here I'm okay with giving up the pawn because I had a really nice idea. And my idea was to put the rook there and put the bishop here. And here basically they are losing a piece, right? So takes. Here I don't want to take back because they take here and white is better. So after takes, I'm just looking at that bishop and takes. Of course I missed a few tactics here because I didn't take the bishop. Here the computer wants me to just take, and after takes, I'll take the bishop. Here I missed that this is impossible because of back rank mate, so this is checkmate. So I didn't do that, and I ended up trying to go for this, complicating matters even further, but yeah, we ended up trading bishops, and here we played an equal endgame, but my opponent only has 12 seconds, as you can see. And this is easier for me to play because I'm just going to keep the rook behind the pawn, and once the king gets close, I'll try to win these pawns for this pawn, something like that. So here, this is how the game went. I pushed the pawns, And here my opponent made. Okay, this is a mistake because I can just. Okay, taking was a bad idea because I can push. And let's say it takes. Okay, oh, the idea is that I'm gonna get this early. I don't really care about taking this pawn back because after the king moves, I'll promote, right? So in this situation, the basic strategy for white is, if I'm remembering it well, white wants to control this pawn, but they also want to be in a position where they can't be checked. So typically, let's say if the king was here, this check doesn't do anything because the king just takes the rook. So being on the second rank is usually okay, or being behind pawns is also okay because there's no check, right? If there's a check, it's much more dangerous. But here I didn't see those nuances, so I just pushed. And here my opponent made the mistake of. The good thing here is my rook can just stay here. The moment the king comes out, it's a check, right? So here, of course, this wasn't played in the most accurate way. It's a blitz game, but I thought that I should be able to get away with this, and I could have. So I saw that my opponent couldn't take the pawn. So the computer says it's fine for white because they can just bring their queen, the king close. If I try to attack the rook, let's say the pawn is pushed, the rook stays, basically the rook stays guarding the pawn. The king isn't going to get exposed. So the king can basically stay here. White could basically just shuffle their king back and forth if they're not trying to lose, right? Just shuffle your king back and forth. Alright. But in the blitz game, I saw that they can't take the pawn. My opponent did take the pawn, and now, after these empty checks, I'm just gonna rook versus two pawns, and my king, most importantly, my king is active, so my king is behind the pawn, so I control everything. And here my opponent resigned. So that was another nice game in the Smith-Morra. This e6 setup really works for me. And as you can see, if I go in the Leechess player database, um, here after knight c6, I score 56%. I've lost 33%, and the rest are draws. So it should be noted that I also took a bit of a break from playing on Leechess. So that's why most of these games are recent games. Right. And maybe I used to play a different setup with the Smith-Morra because I didn't really know what it was when I was lower rated. Right, before I knew what the Smith-Morra was, I used to go for some fianchetto setup. So, okay, knight c6, knight f3, and let's see, d6, bishop c4. Okay, I used to go for some setup with g6 because when I was learning Sicilian, since there are so many versions of them and so many variations that white can go for, right? I learned that I noticed some part in that if as you can see, I have quite a few games here from very long time ago. Notice some part in that if white doesn't go for an ordinary Sicilian, usually you can go for fianchetto setups. And yeah, even this g6, according to Stockfish, is still equal. So you might need to know some tricks, but at lower levels, it wasn't really challenging because most people also don't know all the things that they can face, right? Let's say you're used to playing the Smith-Morra and you only know the main lines. If somebody plays something strange, they also get confused. But then at this level, once you get to 1800, 1700, people know more, so it helps to know some of the main lines. But yeah, that's basically it. Since I've started playing knight c6, that's why I have more success in these lines. It was 66% or something from the position with from this position, I think. Right, from knight c6, I have more success here. Okay, so let's go through the fourth game. Same thing, same opponent. Also, there are other opponents who played the Smith-Morra against me. three more opponents, so we'll also look at those games. And here in this game, I lost. Okay, my opponent did something. This is another thing that people in the Smith-Morra like to go for. I'm just going to go back to the Masters database. And according to the Masters database, after an early bishop f4, you can just go knight f6. Queen e2, you can go bishop e7 is the second most popular move. You can go e5. Let's see, queen e2, if you go for bishop e7, let's go for something natural. Okay, here white has the extra benefit of going rook e1. If we castle, e5, okay, here we're just giving the pawn back, basically. So, let's see, if we do this, let's say if they take, and we take 1, 2, 5 pawns each, right? So here we're giving the pawn back. But I know that a safe thing to go for. So you may be tricked that this evaluation after e5, you can see that both evaluations, whether I play knight f5, knight f6 rather, or e5, it still drops. So here, what I like to do is I just go for the same setup with e5. This is typically helpful every time because this move introduces the same threat, right? If you just go knight f6, okay, if you just go, let's say a6, there is the threat of e5, not here, but at some point after white castles and puts the rook here, there's going to be that threat. So, okay, now that I remember it, I think I used to play some setups where I played knight of 6, but then, and maybe this is on chess.com, I would play knight of 6, and once another thing that you can do here is basically you can play knight of 6, and once a rook goes on d1, which is what they're going to try to do, you play e5. Right, but in this case, I went for the immediate e5. So back to the Masters database, there are no games from here. So here, knight f6. Right, so apparently this loses. This loses to knight g4 because now we can't castle, right? Yeah, so this loses. So which is why bishop e7 first in this position is better. Okay, in the position after castles, after knight f6, if they castle first, this this doesn't work because we don't have a hole here, right? But then in the bishop f4 line, we've already played e5, so knight g5 is much more dangerous. Okay, so that's a nice thing for me to note as well, because this is a blitz game, I'm just making moves, but bishop e7, and here I'm going for this setup. I'm basically running away from this diagonal. So the computer doesn't mind. It's like you can just put your bishop here. So like I said, you can put your bishop here on e6. So here I went for this setup, queen e7. I like to go for a6 b5 because this expansion is just useful in most Sicilians, especially here that white has castled kingside. So my opponent lost 3 games in the Smith-Morra, and basically they're going for crazier moves that they wouldn't typically go for because they're trying to win this one. Right, so in this game, just castled and yeah, bishop e3. Like if you're not sure where to put your bishop, bishop e6 is fine. Let's see, can I go bishop d7? This is also fine. But then some of the advantage is lost. So, but yeah, bishop e6, and here they're trying to pin my queen. I run away, takes, and I remember this game actually. It was very dynamic. You see that white is going for the attack, right? So a6. Basically, here I can't take the knight because there's all sorts of trouble after takes, and this is going to be mate, so, or this rather, or close to mate because there's also going to be e6 coming, or they're going to take the rook, so I ignored that, went here, and in this game I was lower on the clock, so that's another problem with blitz. In the last few games I played quicker. Here my opponent went for a string setup, and yeah, I finally took because I saw that it was safe to take. because the queen has moved away. And I remember that I lost this game because I forgot about queen h1. I forgot that this rook was hanging basically. So after takes king h1, white is just up a rook. And this game I tried to defend and defend and defend, but yeah, the game was lost. So there was a nice little tactic here actually, which is you can just go for this. They can't take because of this. If they take here, this. So this is kind of cool that if the queen moves away, basically, now white is losing a rook. So maybe if it was a rapid game, I would have split at that. But all in all, you see that this setup is very effective against the Smith-Morra. Go for e5. You go for e6, e5 first. You don't go for e5 right away. You want to induce, you want white to make a move they wouldn't normally make, so that now you play e5. Okay. So even though I lost this game, I'm not really mad. It was just a complicated tactical game. I did the best I could, and then I missed the tactic. Okay. Now let's look at another game I played on the exact same day in the Smith-Morra. So this is the setup: d6, e6, knight c6. And the reason why I make these videos is most setup videos aren't very. I feel like most opening videos sometimes they're not comprehensive. It's like there's win in 7 moves or use this trick or yeah, use this trick. Of course, I did see some videos in the main lines, but then it was from White's point of view. So it was, I think it was Daniel Raditsky's speedrun video that I watched, but then it was from White's perspective. So as Black, it's kind of different. Also, I think this is useful for me because I go through the games number one, and it's also useful for you guys because this is a more practical implementation where I'm going through the moves and describing them. So it helps one remember. All right. So bishop g5. And typically what I like to do is I don't analyze an opening that much until I face difficulties in it. Like I remember for a very long time I used to know I didn't really have a system against the London because I didn't really struggle with it until I got to the point where people knew a lot of moves in the opening and not knowing some opening theory was just a disadvantage. But moving on, same system here, knight f6. So maybe another advantage of the immediate bishop e7, which is what the computer is recommending, is now this move is discouraged. So maybe I should be going for bishop e7 first. But anyways, knight f6. But then we're not even afraid of bishop g5 because this just gives us an advantage, right? Bishop e7, queen e2, castles, e5. Again, same idea. If I do nothing, of course h6 is useful here, but let's say I play a3. White is going to do this. And in this position, the computer doesn't mind because the bishop is here. So if takes, we're not really losing a pawn because defended twice, right? Even if the queen defends, we just take and we're still up a pawn. Okay. So in this position, no need for that with bishop g5 setups, I guess. So that's interesting to know. Maybe I'll implement that in another game and then I'll describe it. But this is a safe move, so I went for it. And in this setups, bishop e6 is your friend, especially now that h6 h3 has been played. All right. So here h3 was played, bishop e6 takes. Here I went for tactical complications, but computer is like, take this pawn first, take this first, this. But yeah, this didn't look very pleasant for me. So after this, I took there, takes. But yeah, here the idea is my position just got really cramped. As you see in a few moments, the computer wants me to go g6 literally as the only move because if I go rook c1, okay, rook c1 is another move, but then the evaluation, it's only showing 2 moves. Okay, 3 moves. So I guess it's not bad, but I just have to be careful because I'm cramped. So here I play rook. I did actually play rook c8, just x-raying the queen. And then after this move, for some reason I played b6 because I didn't want to lose the pawn. I moved say as queen a5. Okay, maybe not queen a5. Okay, the computer wants rook d queen d7, rook back to b1. As you can see, the main move rook b1 here just seems passive. It's like I just put my rook on c8. Now you want me to put it back on d8. Just seems passive. So ended up playing b6, and this was the beginning of the end because after takes, my knight is no longer in the game, and white just gets a very active setup. This knight is literally a monster. I don't know where I should put my queen, and this game ended pretty quickly. Right. So here, I guess. Actually, I remember this game. Even though I was worse, I was down a few pawns. One, two, three, four, five, six. I was down a piece. I think I did manage to somewhat equalize here. We had this complicated end game. No, it's not this game. Okay, sorry, I was misremembering. It's another game. All right. So the failing point here was okay. Yeah, I think allowing. Sometimes when you see a tricky move, you think it's the best way to go because I attack the queen, and then I take here. But actually, turns out, like I said before, this d5 square is very important. So it turns out it was much better to allow this and have a pawn controlling d5 than it was to avoid double pawns because now my opponent just has a better. This knight is better than the bishop, right? Good knight versus bad bishop. Why is this bishop bad? When the typical way that that's described in chess, bishop is bad when all the pawns are on the same color square. So as you can see, I'm left with this dark squared bishop. All the pawns are on dark squares. They're blocking the bishop, right? So yeah, I lost that game. So that was instructive, just because of the tactic. But then the opening was a bit of a success, if I may say so myself. All right. So here I faced the same opponent, and they did something different. And the different thing was they didn't take. So like I said here, there's a line where you take and they take like this. But typically when I'm playing Blitz, I go for one of my main points is know your opening. So I don't really know this line very well because I rarely face it, and I feel like this one is just as good. So I went for this the typical ideas because I didn't want to get into strange territory. But maybe I should have done that. But anyways, we end up facing another bishop g5 system. Takes. Okay. So what was the? So here, maybe I should have gone e5, taken my own advice, and been like, okay, now. So the problem is here, I didn't see that e5 was a threat, right? Because after bishop, here my opponent has combined the idea of bishop e5 and the idea of bishop g5. So I always think these positions are fine. These are fine for me because I can get d5. The problem is now my opponent gets an early e5. And I can't do this because I haven't castled yet, right? If I had castled, then I would have placed the knight here, would have had more defenders for this d6 pawn. Alright, so here, this is the best I can do. I took back with the bishop, and now I'm down. Sorry, my pawn structure is in tatters. It's ruined. So I didn't want to give the pawn back. The computer is like, just give the pawn back, right? This should be better. Yeah, maybe I should have given the pawn back. I tried to defend the pawn, and this led to some complications. But the position was still fine for me. Let's see. Okay, now we're yeah, the pawn has been won back. Okay, so this is the game that I was remembering that time. So we end up in some end game, and here I have extra pawns on the king side. White's main threat is this pawn, so I can sit down and just try to defend this pawn, or I can go for active play. And in this case, I went for active play. The idea is White would be trying to promote, but I would be trying to attack. So that they take the pawn and here check. This was my idea from the whole time. The idea was after check, the queen is gonna move and then the rooks are going to take. We're gonna trade one pair of rooks. I'm gonna win a pawn, and then my rook is gonna go back. It'll be attacking this pawn. And meanwhile, I'm gonna use this knight to try and defend or maybe even push this pawn. So that was my idea. And here I go back attacking the pawn because I can't take the pawn because the knight is in front. Right. Bring the knight back, and here we trade. Right. So basically, the idea is put the rook behind. And then here I realize something. I'm like, wait a minute, I too have a passed pawn. So to make things easier for me, I'm gonna try to push this pawn. Now here the computer's like, after this doesn't work here because of check. Right, because of the check with the knights. So that's kind of nice. It doesn't work because of the tactic, but even here I'm very mm, if white plays something silly, I could use this knight. So it doesn't work because of the tactics. Both of us didn't see this, so it wasn't that bad of a move. Okay, now I'm just pushing, and here my whole idea was my knight should be able to defend the pawn, so I should have gone for this, this. The rook should have would have gone back, and now I have this move. And basically, next move, let's say white goes here. Oh, sorry, this is a bad move because the rook is hanging. Promote to a queen, and after takes. This is equal. But for some reason during the game, I was like, wait, can I just push? What is white going to do if I just push? And I had so much time here, so I was kind of annoyed with myself. But then I didn't see that they had the check. I thought here white is gonna have to go back, and now I'm gonna take. And then I think I had ideas that I might actually win this position. Yeah. So I blundered this because I thought I could win until I saw this check and I realized that, oh no, I'm just losing. So that was on the Smith-Morra. All in all, similar type of setup. And this is the case where I had some problems because I didn't play e5, right? So this is a lesson. Play e5 if you can, if you have to. So always calculate, can white play e5? So here I could have gone e5 myself or chased away the bishop. Knight d7 is also an idea, right? Because now the queen isn't attacked. But yeah, here I think I didn't see e5 because I thought, well, the queens are staring at each other, so I'm not losing a queen, but I should have prevented that. So yeah, this is the case of not following what you're supposed to do, and we ended up in unfamiliar territory. But the position was still equal. The end game was played okay, and yep, it was just the case where I blundered at the last minute, so it's fine. Now it just sounds like the rest of this video is me justifying my moves. Which is very funny. Okay, so now we're facing another Smith-Morra, and I also lost this game. My opponent did the exact same thing, but I rejected it, and I went for this setup. Now the immediate bishop b5. Here I rejected it because if they take and take, remember white has this idea, but then they'll have to play queen e2 and rook d1 first. But here I just played e5 right away. I didn't want to end up in a bad situation like in the last game. And here I would say the opening here was a success because takes and bishop e6, right? Opening is a success. And here it was just a matter of how do I defend this pawn. Now I didn't want to go to d1 because I was afraid of being pinned, but I forgot that on c1 I can also be pinned, right? The the rook could also go there, so maybe d7 rather, d7 and c8. Sorry, sometimes I mess up the names of the squares, but yeah, this is what we got. a6. So the idea behind a6 is I just like to prevent knight b5, but yeah, at this point, a6, the knight still comes here. I didn't see this idea because the queen was here, so that's the other advantage of queen b3. And yeah, queen here. So this was just, I think this game was just a case of me missing tactics because after this, there's the knight can still take, because if I take, the knight also takes the queen. So I missed that tactic. I thought my knight was safe there. But basically here I just landed my knight basically. And that's how the game was lost. So this was one of the worst games, and yeah. But the opening went fine. It was just a case of missing a tactic and going for an unnecessary a6. So maybe this is something that I also need to avoid if I don't have to. Queen d7 would have been fine. All right. So if you're not a fan of this pawn structure, I guess the other thing you could say is maybe just go for bishop g5, right? Nothing you could do, just go for bishop g5, and you don't have to worry about having a bad pawn structure. So yeah, that was another game, and this is the last game. So generally speaking, I think I lost 3 games in the Smith-Morra. Lost 4 games, okay. Lost 4 games and won 4 games, which isn't bad. The lost games weren't because of the opening as well. So I would say that in most of the positions, I got a nice position out of the opening, which is why this is why I really like this system. Okay, we get similar opening, and sorry, this is the last game. It's in the wrong game. Okay, we get this system. Queen e2. This is what you're most likely to face. So the other reason why I face a lot of strange systems sometimes is because I like to go for rematches, and people like to try different stuff. But yeah, remember this is the main move in this line, e5, castles. Here my opponent goes bishop e6, e3 rather, which doesn't do much, and here we just develop. And of course, immediately my opponent blunders the pawn, which I did take, and yeah, as you can see, the reason why I went back is thought, okay, my opponent is tilted, maybe they'll blunder e5. The computer also wants f4, right? Typically, f4 in this position, f5 works because this diagonal is well protected by the bishop. So, but here it just went back, still have an advantage, takes, and here the added bonus of being able to take with the queen, and yeah, here I'm just up. How many pawns? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 5. I'm up 2 pawns. So the one downside of having a strong center, they say that in chess, having space restricts pieces, so you have to be careful with pushing the pawns as well because you create holes. Right now, this is a hole, these are holes. As much as having a little space is a good thing, it's also a responsibility, which means that you have to make sure that all your pawns are being managed, protected. But here I wanted to just trade queens because I just wanted to simplify things, and yeah. Here, the game got a bit tactical. I think I remember missing something here. What did I miss? Um, Here, I'm okay giving up the pawn because I thought that maybe at some point I might have some ideas for mate. But yeah, here, let's check again. Okay, bring my rook into the game. I bring my knight back. I was trying to go for some setup where, let's say I have a knight here and I'm threatening mate. I was okay giving up the pawn, But here the computer didn't like this because of takes. But here I thought on blitz game, you don't do much, a lot of calculation. I thought this should be fine for me because I'm the one attacking. I should be able to promote, but apparently the computer says it's not fine. And I was right ultimately because it was harder for my opponent to play. So, and here I had this nice tactic which I missed. And the idea is the rook can't take because it's pinned. But anyways, it's blitz. We trade, and yeah. I simplified this a bit, but I'm up a pawn here, so I thought if anyone has winning chances, it's me. So here the game just ended quite quick. So yeah, these are all the games that I wanted to analyze, and the idea is in the Smith-Morra. So let's look at the first idea is knight c6. In the main line, always look out for once the rook comes in, play e5. And if you play this really quickly, usually your opponents will be surprised and they'll sort of tilt because like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, right? And then yeah, so this was fine. So those are the main ideas. What other setup did we face? This is the this is a similar setup, but here my opponent tried to play e5 right away. I was able to consolidate, and then the other setup that we faced is okay. So this is a similar setup. Okay, the other setup is with bishop f4. Here you have the option of going bishop e7. So I'm just gonna go through the main moves, and let's say castles, knight f6, queen d2. You can wait if you castle here. I think e5 still no, e5 doesn't work. But then yeah, rook here. If you go e5 now there are sacrifices here. Okay, so in the bishop f4 setup, you can delay the move e5, but then it comes with you need to be extra aware of what's going on. So queen e2. Once queen e2 is played, now play e5. Okay. So, or you can play bishop e7. But now the threat of e5 is coming. So the way I see it, once you face bishop f4, the easiest thing to do is just play e5 right away. Alright. And in this game, I was able to consolidate, so that's another system. Remember, this game was lost because of crazy tactics. And this was the case of, okay, it's better to have the pawn here than fixing the pawn structure. So this knight dominated my bishop, so it was a difficult game to play. And this game was just, this one was well played, but I missed the tactic towards the end. So in bishop g5 systems, always look out for the opportunity for your opponent to play e5, especially once the bishop comes in like this and the knight can no longer defend the square. So here, ideas are bishop d7, castles, because now if e5 is played, we're not really worried because we have some quick development. Alright, so those are the ideas in this one. Always look out for e5, and last two games, bishop d6. This was about the case of failing to defend this pawn. And the last game was the main line, and it was well played and well handled. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share in this video. Is how to play against the Smith-Morra Gambit, and there are many systems that you can use. There are the G6 systems, and there are the main lines. But I think that at most beginner levels, or at least at my level, this is a system that I find really comfortable to play. And if we look at the Masters database, this idea of okay, once you get here, I guess it's ready. But this is like this idea of d6 is played a decent number of times, right? So yeah, of course most of these would transpose if you play e6 right away, or knight c6, bishop c4. knight c6. In this position, if knight c6, bishop c4, yeah, e6 is likely to be one of the main moves that you're gonna go for. So if you are having problems against the Smith-Morra, this is a useful setup that you can implement. So e6, this is the main line, but most people know this line, and there's so many tricks. Sometimes the knight goes here, sometimes the bishop goes here. But this is a comfortable system that you can use. Knight c6, e6, bishop e6, sorry, e6, d6, knight f6, bishop e7, castles, and e5 whenever white is threatening to play e5 themselves. So I hope this video was helpful and instructive. Hope you guys learned something. I also learned something while recording this, and yeah, if you're watching this, hopefully you can implement this in your own game. So thanks for watching, and bye.